to adjusting size and position.
In the size and position step, you choose the basic layout parameters for your portrait flow. On the left side are the settings that control how your portraits will appear, and the right side is a visual representation of these settings. First, choose the size of your portraits measured in picas, the number of rows per page, and the number of columns per page. You're limited to the number of rows and columns that will fit on one page given the portrait size you selected. Once you've set the basic layout, it's helpful to switch to the live preview. This view shows you a preview of the first spread of the flow with the actual portraits and names. When you make a change to the settings, the preview automatically updates. You should then choose a character style to control the look of the names. It defaults to the photo credit style, which will set the names in AHJ times 8 point. This works well if you want to use the default, but if you already have a character style set up for this, you can choose it from the pull-down list. If you'd like to create a new character style, click the plus symbol. Give the style a name, then choose the font, size, and color for the names. It's recommended you choose a relatively small point size to be sure the longest names will fit within the text frames. Typically, portrait names are printed in 8 to 10 point type. When you're done, click Apply to create the style. Then click the X in the upper right corner to close the dialog box, and then select your new character style from the menu. Then choose the name order you desire, either first name then last name or last name then first name. And finally, choose whether you want the names to appear beside the portraits or beneath the portraits. There are 2 additional sets of controls that allow you to adjust the shape of the frames and have more control over spacing and margins. We'll cover these features in additional segments on Portrait Flow. When you've completed the size and position settings, click Next.
As you can see, under size and position, there's a lot of flexibility using the wizard to get the portraits to fit, the allocated space that you've set up for that section. So a lot of choices here. Now we're going to go into the layout portion.
In the layout step, you'll see a rendering of the portraits as they'll flow onto the pages of your book, given your current settings. The page numbers at the bottom indicate the spread currently being viewed. You can click on the right and left arrows to view other spreads that will be included in this portrait flow. If you wish to knock out certain portrait spots to make room for candids or additional coverage, simply click and drag over the portrait boxes you want to exclude. As you exclude portrait frames from the flow, Portrait Flow automatically adds more frames onto the last page of the flow to accommodate the number of portraits in the section. If you wish to reactivate portrait boxes, click on the deactivated boxes to turn them back on. When you've completed the layout step, click Next.
So as you can see in the layout section, it's a really cool way to add candids or other pieces of the layout to break it up so it's not just portraits. And then the final step here is flowing the portraits.
In the flow area, you're given a summary of the portrait flow. When you've reviewed these settings, click Flow Portraits. You also have the option to flow portraits and repeat, which will flow the current portraits and return you to the first step in the Portrait Flow wizard so you can begin another flow. For this example, I'll click Flow Portraits. The Portrait Flow wizard will close and the portraits will flow on your yearbook pages. When the Portrait Flow wizard is finished, you can go to one of the spreads in your ladder and choose Edit to examine the spread. Should you see any name changes that need to be made, you should make these changes to names in the Portrait section of the library and then reflow the group. Any changes you've made to the portrait frames or the portrait names on the pages will be lost if you reflow the section. See the tutorials listed on screen for more information.
And I do want to highlight that. The key here is if you have any changes to make, to avoid doing them right here on the page, because as I said earlier, it's kind of like a domino effect. Brooks, if that's spelled, if it's a different last name and starts with an S, it's a static move. If you were to go in manually and make that change here, it doesn't affect the portraits before, after, or actually move it. So any changes you make, you want to avoid doing it here on the page and go back to the library under portraits to do so. and that will really help you save time in redoing work later, because the reflow process, as Mark mentioned, is very simple. Okay, so those are the 3 basic steps. Now we're going to go into a couple additional features. What we just covered there with Mark are all the basics in uploading your portraits, proofreading them, and getting them on the pages and reflowing as necessary. But here's a couple short little videos on some unique things that you might want to look at if you need to. But we'll jump into this here, and I'll be right back.
The placeholder option in the Portrait Flow Wizard allows you to set up your portrait pages at any time, even before you have the portrait disc from your photographer. To flow with placeholders, navigate to the Book module and select the page on which you want the flow to begin. Then go to the Edit menu and choose Flow Portraits. For this example, I'll click Add to create a new portrait group and give it the name Sophomores. I'll then choose Placeholders rather than Portraits. The Number of Placeholders field allows me to tell the Portrait Flow Wizard how many portraits I expect to be in this group. I've checked with the school office and learned we have approximately 292 sophomores, so I'll type 292 in the box and click Next. The rest of the process follows the same steps as shown in the other Portrait Flow tutorials. When I've completed the process, I see that Portrait Flow has created placeholder frames on my pages with the settings that I specified. I can now add additional coverage or design elements to these pages. After uploading the portrait disc from my photographer, I can then reflow the group with the actual images and names, and all the other content on my pages will remain intact. See the tutorial on reflowing groups for more information.
So this is a great resource for those of you who either just want to, kind of rough in the section to see what it'll look like, add the candid photos or any other, pieces of the page, or for those of you listening who have a fall delivery book and you really want to get the pages kind of set up, but you're not going to have those portraits potentially for a while or not submitting them. Again, it's a great way to just rough it in with placeholders and then fill it in, as he said there, reflowing the group later and just replace it with the portrait. So that's reflowing. Let's look at this one under duplicate settings real quick.
Duplicating portrait settings makes it easy to create a new portrait group with the same settings as an existing group. To do this, open the Portrait Flow Wizard and select a group. Then click Duplicate. A new portrait flow will be created with the same settings as the original. I'll give the new flow a name and associate another group of portraits. On the Select Page step, I'll want to select a different starting page, and then I can complete the Portrait Flow Wizard to create the new flow. This flow will already be set up with the same settings as the flow I duplicated. You can take advantage of a similar feature when flowing multiple groups in succession. When I reach the end of the Portrait Flow Wizard for one flow, I see this button, Flow Portraits and Repeat. If I choose this option, it will flow the current set of portraits and take me back to the beginning of the Portrait Flow Wizard with the same settings loaded so that I can flow the next group. I'll give the new flow a name, change the group to be flowed, and then I'll select a different starting page before completing the rest of the Portrait Flow Wizard. And that's how you use duplicate settings in Portrait Flow.
So this is really great, guys. If you already know your box size and how many on a page and the overall appearance of all the grid, for the section, that duplicate function really speeds up the process. You don't have to, reinvent the wheel each time for each class. So consider using that. If you know what your settings are and they're consistent, it's a great way to speed it up. Okay, this one is on Portrait Flow and including the teacher.
The Portrait Flow Wizard gives you the option to include a teacher with his or her class when flowing portraits according to the teacher grouping. Here on the first step of the wizard, I'll choose to flow by the teacher category and then select the teacher whose class I want to flow. I'll then see this option to include teacher. When I select this option, Portrait Flow will pull up a list of all the staff members in my portrait library, and in some cases it will have already identified the teacher that belongs to the group. When you hover over the name of the teacher, a preview of the portrait appears. To select a teacher or change the selection, just click on the teacher's name and you'll see a green checkbox beside his or her name. The names that appear here will be those designated as teachers or staff members in the portrait library. If you're creating a flow that uses placeholder frames, you'll see the option to include a larger teacher portrait on the size and position step. When you've made these selections, click Next. When you get to the size and position step, you'll see some additional options. I'll switch over to Live Preview so we can get a better representation of these changes. In the controls, you'll see the option to include the teacher's title. If you wish, you can select this option and then choose the title to be used for this teacher. You can also select whether you want it to show the teacher's title and last name only, or title and full name. You also have the option to use a larger teacher portrait. Choosing this option will make the teacher's portrait twice as large as the student's portraits. Once you've made these selections, you can proceed through the Portrait Flow Wizard as described in the other tutorials, and the teacher's portrait will flow along with his or her class.
This is a great way to speed up the process. If you're listening and you want to have the teacher in position 1 in a larger photo, boy, it's just a couple of clicks and it does it for you. It is based on information being captured correctly on the PSPA QPP disk. Sometimes it's not. Again, if you run into that problem, let me know. We can probably fix it. You know, this is to speed it up from the old days of where you would, go into the portrait and add an AAA at the beginning of the name to move it up in alphabetical order. Then it places the teacher in the first position, and then you just delete those characters at the start, which is a good workaround. And sometimes that works, but this option really speeds it up if you need to put the teacher in the first position. Okay, this next one is on frame shapes. We're almost done here. I just want to cover all of these. So again, this last step here, this series of videos is little details you might not need, but I just want to show them to you in case they come up.
In the Size and Position step of the Portrait Flow Wizard, you have the option to adjust the shape of the portrait image frames. Click the Adjust Frames bar to expand the controls. The default setting is for square corners on the image frames, but you can change it over to rounded corners, and then use the slider to adjust the radius of the rounded corner. If you're flowing a teacher portrait along with the class, you'll see this separate set of controls for the teacher's portrait. You also have the option to flow oval portraits. You can click the Portrait Rows and Columns bar to expand those controls again. Once you've made these selections, you can proceed through the Portrait Flow Wizard as described in the other tutorials.
Again, just a helpful little tool to expedite if you wanted to put a different shape on. You can always do that after the fact by selecting all on a page and changing the corner effect, but doing it here, it's also saved into your settings for that flow, so you can always come back to it if you need to reflow and not have to redo that work. Again, all these tools, the idea is here to minimize manual work and input that you might have to redo if you have to reflow for any reason. Okay, last one here is on spacing and margins.
The advanced spacing and margin settings in the Portrait Flow Wizard allow you to customize portrait settings to accommodate a variety of designs. I'm here in the Size and Position step of the Portrait Flow Wizard. This example flow has been set up with a large portrait size with the names arranged beneath the portraits. I'll click on Live Preview to get a better sense of what these settings will look like. The portraits are closer together than I would like, so I'll click the Adjust Spacing and Margins bar to expand the Advanced Settings area. In this area, you can change the horizontal and vertical spacing between the portraits. In this case, I'll increase both the horizontal and the vertical spacing. The measurements are in picas. In some cases, you may also want to increase the external margin slightly to allow for one more row or one more column to fit on a page. Always consult the Live Preview area to be sure you're not allowing the names or portraits to extend too far toward the edge of the page, bearing in mind that some names may be much longer than those you see in the preview. Tweaking these settings will allow you to create just the design you're looking for. Once you've made the selections, you can proceed through the Portrait Flow Wizard as described in the other tutorials.
Excellent. Thank you again, Mark, and I hope that was helpful. I know there's several videos to watch. They're all available. I can send you links to any of these if you'd like to revisit them, or you can just watch this here on the YouTube channel. But again, those tools are to help you get the portrait pages done, and all honestly, the portraits, even though it may seem daunting, especially if this might be your first year in yearbook, it may seem daunting because it's so many details to work out. But as you can see from that wizard, honestly, once you get a handle on these tools here, this is probably the simplest part of the book because of the automation. So I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions on this or any other topic, or you have any other topics you'd like to see covered in the podcast here, please reach out. Love to hear from you. Hope you found that helpful, and you have a great day. Thank you.